getting ready to roll. All right, we're ready for another episode of Coffee with the Founder. I have my coffee cup and my coffee in here. And of course, we have another phenomenal guest, friend, colleague, Claudia Fox Tree. Claudia, we're doing these sessions trying to let people get a sense of the folks who are part of the WPC family and the work they do, the expertise that they carry, just so folks can have a sense of the kind of people that are coming, but not only presenting at the conference, but the things that they do when they get back to their communities. So I always start by just asking you and asking all of our guests, if I was to meet you at a bus stop or at an airport or at a grocery store and I introduce myself, hey, I'm Eddie, give you a little bit about myself, and I ask you, who are you? What work do you do? What's your expertise? How would you respond? Who is here with us today?
So to me, those are a little bit two different questions, because what I say at a grocery store might be a little different than what I say what do you do from work being at a conference. And so I'm going to go with the conference version for a moment, because I need to say Tagwe Titunu Kenatiano Dakadiri Claudia Fox Tree, which is greetings to everyone in the Taino language and acknowledging my name as Claudia Fox Tree. And I would continue to say that I grew up, got educated in, and live really close to Shawmut, which a lot of other folks know as Boston, and acknowledge the indigenous people, the Massachusetts, who were the original and still are the caretakers of the land that I currently live on, even though we're close to Wampanoag and Nipmuc territory as well. And that response of who are you and where you're from is part of who I am and where I'm from, which is as an indigenous person from the Arawak Nation, and recognizing that this is not the land of my ancestors, and it is the land of other indigenous ancestors. And that invisibility of whose land it is and who's still taking care of it, who will continue to take care of it long after I leave in terms of their descendants, is the work that one of the pieces of the work that I do before and after I attend the WPC events.
Yeah. So when people ask you, or when you say to people whose land this is, I feel like I've done some work around that, so I can understand when you say understand or give some respect or pay some respect to who was here for first, so to speak. But I'm wondering, just in general, how do people respond when you say there were people here before you got here? Like, we got to understand that this is not our place and space, so to speak. What's been the kind of response people have gotten when you've talked about whose land this is?
You know, I've gotten responses ranging from what do you do when you're not in this country, like in Europe, and to, oh, of course, there's other people here. How do I find out who they were? I have not gotten negative responses, although I assume that that is possible and it's out there, along the lines of, aren't they all dead? Or, you know, the winners are the ones who should claim the land. I haven't gotten that. To the one of where in the world, I say, well, there were some indigenous people somewhere in the world. And so that idea of thinking of who are the original people and caretakers of the land is important no matter where you are. I can only really speak for Native indigenous folks here in the North and South American continents. And in fact, there are some apps. You can also Google it, you know, Grandma Google, you can do that kind of stuff. There's an app called Native Land, No S, that people use a lot as a starting point. Although I have found when I've traveled in this country that when I say the indigenous people that I have researched from the place, there's always somebody from that place that actually has studied or learned or grew up in school, in a progressive school, for example, learning who the people were, and they might help me with the sound of the name or like Connecticut was a different word when it was the indigenous word, and they've helped me understand that. So I've been impressed by how much folks have done some work on their own, and I tend to challenge folks to think further about how they can apply that idea. So if you're traveling, whose land are you traveling to? Are you traveling to the Northern Cheyenne, which is the land of Montana, which doesn't mean you're visiting the Northern Cheyenne, you're visiting the land that they are a part of. Or is it the Crow people in a little south of Montana, or is it the mound builders in St. Louis? So challenge people to really constantly think about the invisibility of people. And as I talk, what happens is that folks realize that they'd never thought of it, and that in fact, Indigenous people have been made invisible. And the truth is, if I'm having this conversation with someone, they're already on the road. They might not be moving forward right at this moment, but they're on that activism road. And so they want to know what their next step is, and they want to know where to go. And someone else, I'm giving them new information. I'm not going to spend as much time because that's not their road for whatever reason. But the ones where it is their road, they will take it and take that next step.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. I'm thinking about teaching and education and kids, and thinking about my own upbringing and what I learned about Indigenous people, First Nation folks. And I'm just not thinking it's a lot, and definitely not a lot that's really positive. So I'm wondering today, what's your sense of what's happening in education when it comes to teaching and learning um, about Indigenous First Nation folks for the most vulnerable, our young people, so that maybe they can be far more advanced than I was when I got to even my first year of college?
So I feel like it's important to acknowledge that 100 years ago, there was a plague that wiped out many of the Indigenous people over here in New England area, and that included the Patuxet. The Patuxet were the people who lived in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and one of their own had been kidnapped, enslaved, brought to Europe, and made his way back to eventually help the Pilgrims in 1620. So we're talking 100 years ago. And now there is another plague, COVID-19, and it is also affecting Indigenous people very, very harshly, because in that 500, well, actually 400 years, it has the idea of Indigenous people not having enough resources continues. So it could be medical resources, it could be access to food and shelter and electricity and internet, and those are still problematic. So having acknowledged that, the story of Tisquantum, also known as Squanto, is very prevalent in our school system with that Pilgrim story. Many times when I'm explaining about Indigenous history, most teachers don't believe that it is relevant to their curriculum. However, all of them have Thanksgiving Day off. All of them have Columbus Day off. All of them celebrate these Independence Days, whether you're talking about Monday's holiday of Patriots Day, which is the beginning of the American Revolution, or the 4th of July. Every holiday has Veterans Day, Memorial Day. They all have connections to Indigenous people. So at the very, very basic level, Indigenous people are always present, even in the days that are picked as holidays. So if it is not your direct curriculum, it is indirectly what you're talking about when you're telling kids you got a long weekend. And
Mm.
so it is relevant to all of us to know some piece of the history, from more Indigenous people per capita sign up for wars as soldiers than any other racial group. Been part of every single conflict that has happened on this land, or for this country or this land in other countries. So that's an important piece of acknowledging the idea of protecting the land that you live on by being a warrior or going into the military. So that's relevant. History is one piece that's relevant. So is the cultural components of honoring the land and environmentalism, as we'd call it nowadays. This is no more obvious than right now, with the air quality becoming better and certain ozones closing up and nature taking time to heal itself while humans aren't around to interrupt that important piece of nature doing what nature does, which is healing the environment. And if we gave it a chance, it would heal us as well.
Mm. Yeah, wow. Um, uh, I, I want to, you mentioned um, something about COVID-19. I want to come back to that. But before that, I think one of the more pressing, more frequent questions I get asked from educators deals with Thanksgiving, Columbus Day, when it comes to Indigenous folks, First Nation folks. Um, do you say Happy Thanksgiving? Do you celebrate Columbus Day? I'm sure this is not new to you. If you're talking to teachers who are willing, I'm saying not the most resistant, I'm saying people who want to do the right thing or do better, what's your advice to them around handling Thanksgiving's Day and Columbus Day?
Those are two of the more controversial things, and things that kids and people know about. They aren't the worst. I mean, there's some horrible, horrible things that have happened with treaties and reservations and other kinds of conflicts, although Columbus is definitely up there. So part of it is telling the whole story, not just the part that makes someone a hero or makes one group a hero. Like, giving the facts and helping kids see that there are missing pieces in the stories that we see in cartoons and movies and whatever other sources they're getting. Those media pieces take just a small part of this Thanksgiving myth or Columbus myth, and you see it over and over and start to believe that it's fact when it's not. So it is important for us as teachers to bring out the facts, because later on when kids actually learn it, then they're like, why wasn't I told this? I can't believe teachers anyway. And we don't want kids to not trust or believe their teachers. So even if it's hard to tell, we need to be telling it and helping kids understand what it is at their grade level. And of course, many things, African slavery included, are moving down in grade levels. And so how much are you going to be right or feel right about teaching kids as they get younger and younger, and you're teaching really tough things that have happened to groups of people at the hands of those in power in the Americas, the United States particularly. So you have to find what's the appropriate way for your students. And remember that some kids already know the hard stuff. And so for you to teach it is validating it, whether it's an Indigenous person that knows what happened at Thanksgiving or Columbus, or a Jewish student who knows what happened at Passover that the Egyptians did with enslaving, or an African American student who knows that their grandparent or great grandparent was, a sharecropper or an enslaved person. So kids are already coming with some cultural background, and to validate that is culturally responsive teaching. It's taking what they come with and bringing it into our curriculum. So it is our responsibility to teach some accurate pieces. And so you may not teach every gory detail of Columbus, which could include that he hunted people for sport, by gun, by knife, and with dogs, that he cut off people's noses and hands if they ran away or stole, which meant taking the food from the gardens that they had plowed but were designated to his soldiers. I mean, there's a whole range of atrocities that he personally committed, and he wasn't a man of his time. Even at his time, he was seen as wrong in doing these things. Or you're talking about Thanksgiving, and the first officially proclaimed Thanksgiving being the massacre of 700 Pequot men and women and children in their homes, and then the burning of the village and the enslavement of the Pequot and the selling of them into bondage. And in terms of Thanksgiving, all of the officially proclaimed ones were religious festivals. So the informal one that we then target has its own history of how it was, how it evolved. And it wasn't at all like the mythology of peacefully coming together and eating as a group. It was probably a diplomatic, military, and it was the soldiers coming together and saying, well, we don't have enough food, let's go out and get more. But the officially proclaimed ones are all religious, and given that the Pilgrims did not see the indigenous First Nations, the Wampanoag people, as as humans, I was going to say, but they saw them as heathens. They were not invited to anything religious. And so there's these kinds of conflicts. You can explain the language, even if you don't want to talk about the massacre, of how it couldn't have happened the way that we're told that it happened.
Mm. You know, I'm always wondering if what the actual Thanksgiving Day celebration is all about. Should you even say Thanksgiving? Like I've been, as a family, wondering if I should say Turkey Day and not even just say that. Is it like saying the N-word around people of color when I'm saying that either amongst my indigenous friends and family or First Nation folks? I got all this stuff going. So I'm asking you to imagine if we're now at Turkey Day gathering, you and I, and those who are listening, and I ask you to do just something to get us ready to break bread. And I don't know. A part of me would say, Claudia, I don't want you to upset my grandpa, but I don't want to make this seem like this is something that was Thanksgiving in its beginning. What are some words you would offer if we were now at that moment? What would you say to the table?
So this is really an imaginary situation, because I actually do not honor this date. It is a day of mourning and I fast that day, so this would not be happening. However, if it were happening, the thing that I would offer is a land acknowledgement and an importance of thinking of the indigenous people from the land that I was having the meal on, potentially being other parts of the country or people talking about where they're coming from and asking them to think of the indigenous people from those places as well. When you ask me that question, you have another indigenous person here, you're going to get another answer. We have as much variety in our answer, even if we know the history, as anyone else. I live in Massachusetts, which is Plymouth, which is Wampanoag, which is the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag and Thanksgiving, right? And so there is a National Day of Mourning or Remembrance, sometimes it's called, at noon at Coles Hill, where there's a Cyrus Dallin statue of Massasoit, and people gather there for prayers and speakers to talk about the state of Indigenous America. And I do that as often as I can. And it also happens a sunrise ceremony out on Alcatraz Island on the West Coast. And those are the big ones. And I'm sure there's stuff other places. When I am with staff, students, other folks on the path, and it is before the event and we're sort of talking about it, I'll be giving the history, and I'll mention that not everybody honors it or celebrates it. And so what are some other things we could say, like have a nice long weekend, or I hope you have some meaningful time with your family this weekend, which is the kind of thing that actually works for multitude, because there's a difference between Happy Rosh Hashanah and Happy Yom Kippur. If you know what those two are, you're not going to say happy in front of both of them. But for either of them, for either of them, you can say, I hope you have a meaningful day off, or I hope the event is meaningful for you. And then it covers whether you're doing more of the prayer or more of the celebratory. So that's like a life skill that I try to help the kids understand. And it goes along with that Merry Christmas and why do I have to do Happy Holidays? Well, it's so that it's inclusive of other people. It isn't, it's when the dominant group has had ownership of what the event is and how it's framed and how you talk about it without acknowledging that the group that group probably has oppressed, or the group that continues to be oppressed. So how do you balance that? So it isn't about ignoring that you have Christmas or Thanksgiving or Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. It's about making it at the same level as everybody else's events. And Thanksgiving is it continues to be highly problematic. It is connected to Indigenous people, only not the way that we're taught it is. Because Indigenous people do what we call Thanksgivings every day, all the time. That's our word for prayer if you were going to translate, because Thanksgiving isn't an Indigenous word. And so giving thanks is Indigenous. And so I might read books with kids that focus on the giving thanks piece. And the question how I frame the conversation about Thanksgiving is, when was the first? What makes it the first? Do we acknowledge the first? Because in those ways, you do come back to the Indigenous stories.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's so helpful for hopefully those who are listening, but even for me as I grapple with this as a father of young kids, as a family that gathers family members, and just really trying to be in collaboration and unity with my Indigenous friends and families and colleagues, but also not celebrating devastation. So thank you. That was really helpful for me. I was going to come back to COVID-19, but I wanted you to kind of talk a little bit about how you're doing during this time, the family's doing, but also what you see happening around in your community. But before that, you had mentioned the state of Indigenous America, Indigenous people, particularly here in America. What's your sense of what is the state of Indigenous people, and maybe how COVID-19 is related to that, or having an impact on that, or will have an impact on that, and how you're doing?
I'm really glad you framed that and asked that, because it's a continuum, right? Because 80% by the last census, who knows what the new one will say, of Indigenous people live off a reservation. We're in regular old neighborhood cities like me. And so I live in a suburb, I work in a suburban school. We have a one-way voluntary desegregation program, so our school is actually 25% diverse, even though our town is not necessarily that. And one of the things that for Indigenous people who are on the reservation, they aren't getting the medical supplies and the medical treatment and the access to hospitals, so they have a huge percentage of folks getting sick. I don't have the numbers, but I recommend that folks follow Indian Country Today. That's the best news source in terms of finding out what's going on. And they will have links for Indigenous people all over the country, on and off the reservation, and what's happening. So it's devastating in that way. Personally, there have been people from my own tribal group, my smaller tribal group, and folks with the Massachusetts Center for Native American Awareness, which is a larger intertribal organization, where we're seeing elders passing away from this disease. So it is not even one step removed from people that I know who are dying from it. And I'm noticing in my suburban school system that when we're getting out what students need to do distance learning, it is following the same racial paths of inequity that we had before the virus. So the same groups need access to food, access to electronics, access to internet, childcare, etc., because those are the families who are losing their jobs or in medical professions and therefore have to work and can't be at home to get their kids on the computers. And so that issue that we've seen all along is being highlighted by this virus. And so we are doing our best to either do some online trainings or virtual conversations onto making sure that we have equal access. And I'm a special educator, and so part of my job is access and accommodations for students with special needs. And as statistics bear out that you have more kids of color in special ed programs than are represented as a percentage in your school. So you might have 25% kids of color, but 50% represented in special ed. And so it becomes an issue that I'm also working with through my job to make sure that all kids are getting access to all the curriculum, given that there isn't an adult right there to help them answer questions on the spot and learn the material. So that's also challenging. On the good side, I gotta say, when internet stuff started happening, Indigenous people, boy, we jumped on that right away, because we have a long history of being removed from our original territories, or being removed even from our reservation in urbanization programs, and being ripped apart from our communities. And so when internet happened, it was a way to connect. So it might have been chat rooms or Facebook pages or whatever it was. Like my Facebook, I got more Indigenous people there than other kinds of people that I work with, right? So we found this way to rebuild or reconnect early on. And the very first weekend that we got this shelter in place, there was a social distance powwow. That powwow was it was virtual. People wore their regalia. They stood on their porch. They stood in front of a TV of a drum group playing, and they did some singing or dancing or prayer or whatever it was. And there might have been 10,000 people that came on it. Within 48 hours, it was 20,000. Now it's like just blown up in the number of people that do go to this virtual social distance powwow. That's what they call it, social distance powwow. I don't like the social piece because we're still being social. We're just physically distant. And now it used to be like Friday night, Saturday, Sunday. And now by Wednesday, Indigenous folks are posting, here's my granddaughter, here's the craft I've been working on. And so we are, again, keeping our community together virtually, which we've had to do. We've had to figure out a different way. We've always adapted to the environment that is handed to us, from live trees and grass to computer age technology.
Yeah. Now, I appreciate being in your presence when having these conversations, because I know I'm not going to get kumbaya, can we all get along?
No.
And I feel like the world needs people telling the truth, pushing, challenging ourselves, our families, our students. But sometimes that can take a toll. What's your sense of telling the truth and the toll it's taken on you, and how self-care, how do you take care of yourself? Because I can imagine being the one that says, you know, that Thanksgiving thing, I don't know. Columbus know that there's not always a positive reception coming back. And I wonder, what kind of toll do you see that taking on folks who are doing that work at the high level of giving truth? And for yourself, how do you take care of yourself, being a truth teller?
I'd love to know how other people do it, and maybe you'll get a little handout on how other people are doing that. For me, it's been a lifelong journey, and not everybody can stay on the path with me. You know, basically, I plow forward. I'm a truth teller, and if you can't hang with me, then you flutter off, because I don't got time for that. You know, if I've got my students in front of me, you got me in the time that you got me, and I'm going to try to teach you in a way that you can hear it. In my personal life, that group is not with me. You know, I have lost friends or let friends go for those very reasons, because I can't, I need people to be able to hang with me. So if they're willing to do the reading, I mean, I've gotten to the point now, publicly, I'll get emails or I'll be in workshops. Maybe they're one-offs. I'm I'm only there one time, and people will want to get into it, and I'll say, well, you read this, or watch this video, or listen to this podcast, and then we can have a conversation again. Because I'm not your teacher right now. I'm answering some questions on what I presented, and this other stuff, I can't talk to you unless you've educated yourself a little. So that's where I'm at with, folks on the fly. And my friends know who I am, and if they want to learn the truth, be a part of a community, they stick with me, and that's okay. I have my family, I've got my small group, do workshops, write, that kind of stuff. That helps me get through this. I also have my Native community. I have the ceremony and prayers and things that I've been taught to, that's our medicine, how to heal in that way. And I find a lot of support in that grounding. For other people, it might be another kind of religion or their aspect of religion. I mean, I don't call it a religion because it's so culturally based. That is strength for people, whatever that piece is. Community is strength, and whatever your medicines and healing are, maybe it's smudging with white sage, maybe it's elderberry tea. We have all kinds of medicines that are given to us by the Earth Mother, the Creator, and this is what those physical medicines are for, as well as the emotional and social ones.
Yeah, thank you for that. What's on the horizon for you 10 years from now, as you look ahead, the work you're going to do, the things you have in mind? Are there some things some goals, some objectives? What's cooking? What's in the future?
I expect that before 10 years are up, I'm going to be retired. I have been working for over 30 years. I'll be at about 37 years when I retire. So that's a long time in teaching, and it's enough time. And I'll be 60, so still young enough to do other things. I hope to write some kind of a book. I've got a couple ideas for different books, and I'd like to do that. I haven't thrown getting a PhD out the window yet either. I love education, and if I had proper funding and the right school, I would love to still do that. There's already 3 Dr. Fox Trees in the world, and I wouldn't mind being the 4th, but I have a feeling that one of my nieces will be the 4th before I get to be the 4th, but that I might be the 5th. That's okay. Yeah. And, I have 5 children, and so I look forward to passing on traditions to grandbabies someday, and if that doesn't happen, being a grandma to other people's babies at our Indigenous events. So I have lots of different options. I also make jewelry and craft, and as long as my hands and eyes hold out, I wouldn't mind doing a little more of that, and might even get an online presence someday.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you joining us and really sharing some of your knowledge and expertise. The way we like to end is a little bit of some fun stuff, fun information, and we've been asking people, what have you been watching? What have you been streaming? We're collecting a kind of top 10 list of things people are recommending. Is there anything you would recommend on your top 3 or 4 lists? Maybe something you watch that you learned something from, or something that you get to escape and just let it all go and enjoy?
I grew up in the 80s, and when I have a moment, my kids say, what do you want to watch? I almost always pick an 80s movie, and then I pick the movie apart, because I knew in the 80s that it was probably sexist and inappropriate. And so now I watch it, and I watch it with this memory of how much I liked it, with the, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're doing that. But in modern shows, I really love things like How to Get Away with Murder. I think Shonda Rhimes is awesome. And The Good Fight, or The Good Wife, it's out of a spinoff. And I'm a Trekkie, so I love Picard and that potential of a different future and how people could get along, or humanity, or human-like beings. So I'll often watch that sci-fi stuff.
Yeah, that's great. There's, with this streaming option, there's so much more out there in reference to sci-fi. I haven't seen that new Lost in Space. You know, I grew up on that show, and I didn't know if you've seen that, but that's one of the shows I've been thinking about just because I was like, wow, they brought that back. Because I'm a sci-fi guy for sure.
Yeah, I've watched all those, Battlestar Galactica. I've watched the old versions, the new versions. I read the
Yeah.
books. I mean, all that stuff. One thing that I'll say about CBS All Access, they have all of the Star Treks, for example, and I paid for the service because I wanted to see Picard, and now they're offering it free. And I say to myself, that is a privilege that I had, that I could pay for it, and I am excited that other people will get to enjoy it for free too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Well, listen, we appreciate your time, and I have always appreciated since the day I met you, the love and support you've given me, shown me, and as long as you will collaborate, we'll collaborate with you. You're always welcome to the WPC symposiums or larger conference. Doctor, I'm gonna put it out there, Dr. Claudia Fox Tree. I'm just gonna put it out there. It's so great to have you. Thank you for joining.
mwah, thank you very much for
Okay,
having me.
okay.
Senoko Kokona. Abundant greetings.
Thank you. Thank you.
Blessings. Abundant blessing. Greetings at the beginning.